Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now your host, Demeere.
Hello everybody and welcome to the show. This is episode 37 and I've got a good one for you today. It is an interview with Randy King from Randy King Live, and I will talk about him in a little bit, but first some housekeeping. Obviously, as always, I give a shout out to one of my patrons, and this time it is to Mr. Barry Eisler. And some of you might be thinking, what? Yes. It is Barry Eisler, bestselling author, who is one of my patrons for about 2 years now. So I want to give a huge shout out to Barry. Thanks. And it's thanks to Barry's support and everybody else on Patreon that I can actually do the podcast and everything else that I do. So thank you, Barry. You the man. And speaking of Barry, his new book is out today. So go to Amazon and go get All the Devils. That's Live You Alone number 3. The Live You Alone series is actually quite good. It's very interesting. It's got a dark, complex character, loads of action, martial arts in it as well. And I've been fortunate that I could read an advanced copy of the manuscript several months ago, and it's good. It's really, really good. In my opinion, it may be Barry's best book yet. But people complain that I say that all the time, and my response is I can't help it. The guy's getting better and better every book he writes. So don't blame me, blame him, and read the book and you'll enjoy it. So I'll put a link in the show notes to that book, and make sure you get it. I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy it. So that's one thing. And the other thing, a small announcement, not coming right now, but in the next podcast. So I've got something special lined up for the month of October. It's now September 24, 2019. So the month of October has got something special coming up. So I would like you guys to stay tuned for that. I will announce it soon, and I'm pretty sure everybody will enjoy that. So that's it with all the teasing. I will now go on to the show. You can see in the show notes the link to the stuff that Randy and I talk about. And also there is a bonus episode for my patrons. Again, the link will also be in the show note. That's it. Let's get started with the podcast. All right, so we're live with Randy King. Randy, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Wim. How are you?
I am excellent. So first of all, I want to say to everybody who's listening, Randy and I just recorded an episode on his podcast, Randy King Live, where we have a discussion where somebody takes the pro and the other person takes a contra position. And we talked about, do you need experience to teach martial arts, self-defense, and so on? Do you need experience with violence? And I argued the pro position, like, yes, you need it. And Randy said, no, you don't. And we talked about that. And it's very difficult to argue something in such a dogmatic way. However, I think we did quite well, I think. And then
I think so, too.
If you want to hear our real thoughts, then you have to head on over to Randy's Patreon. So what's the address again, Randy?
Patreon.com/Randy King Live. I'm the king of branding. Randy King Live, everything. All right. Type that in, you'll find me.
So if you want to hear more after this episode about Randy and me, go over there. So I just want to introduce you a little bit, Randy.
Sure.
So you started martial arts from a very early age. You have experience with Arnis. You worked as a bouncer and so on. Could you just give a little bit of an introduction about yourself to the listeners?
100%. Yeah. So as you mentioned, I started martial arts when I was 10. I really wanted to be a Power Ranger. So that's what pushed me forward. I wish I had a better origin story, but I saw a TV show and wanted to learn how to kick. Started in Taekwondo, went into some basic kind of grappling stuff, nothing major. Then I got really serious about training when I became a bouncer at about 19 years old. Age of consent here, or age of legal is 18 in Alberta, in Canada, where I'm from. So I became a bouncer, and then what kind of put me on this path to teaching and doing the international thing is traditional martial arts has failed me twice pretty considerably. So once due to traumatic brain injury, because it wasn't really known back then, and there was chi healing BS and no internet. And then the other thing was when I got stabbed, and a bunch of things happened when I got stabbed, which included depression, which included some mental health issues because of the ego that was built up from my martial arts training. And so from that, I did security. I did VIP security. I ran a security company. I was the head of security for a bunch of bars. And then I moved into self-defense instruction.
All right. That's pretty good. You mentioned it, and I think you also mentioned, use this incident when you teach. You mentioned getting stabbed as a bouncer.
I do.
This is a question I get a lot: knife, self-defense, and so on. I'll share my personal position. I don't believe that there's a be-all and all system for knife defense. I just don't think anything is out there that you say like, aha, this is it. I think there are too many variables and issues with defending against the knife. However, what I'm a strong believer in is that talk to people who've experienced it. We just before we started recording talked about that, given the previous discussion on your podcast. But okay, if it's okay with you, could you talk a little bit about that incident? What happened? What did you do? And the aftermath, which you kind of hinted at it already. Go.
Right. Well, the really cool. I'm going to say cool because from an experimental point of view, the really cool thing about it is I'm one of the few people that I know that has both my anecdotal experience, but who also got to see the security footage of the event after. Yeah. And so that's the major part of the course that I teach when I tell this story, and I'll tell the shortened version of it right now, is that I get to give you my what happened intrinsically, but also I get to see what the security camera saw, and they were wildly different things. And there's a lot of the info out there now says that, but this is new. When I was doing this stuff, there wasn't anybody saying this. There wasn't anybody talking about freezing. There wasn't really anybody talking about, not in a civilian level at least, talking about freezing, talking about time dilation, talking about adrenaline symptoms. This is all crazy. So I was working at a bar, the Purple Onion here in Edmonton, Alberta, on White Ave. It doesn't exist anymore. It was my favorite place. My entire life started on the sidewalk of that place. I was working. It was a Wednesday night. I've been bouncing for about 3 years, and over those 3 years, I built up a reputation in my city. All this is very important. I'm not humble bragging. So why it's important is because I was in a place of what's known as assumed compliance. People, because they knew me, listened to me all of the time, and my incidents of going physical were dropping because of how well I did in some of the incidents earlier. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I earned my place. Now people are like, oh, it's Randy at the door. Don't screw around, blah, blah, blah. So Wednesday night, bar is dead. Person comes up to the door and wants to get into the bar. And so at this point, to date myself, we had just instituted mandatory ID. So you have to have ID to come in the bar. This was not normal a week before this. So a person walks up. I am doing – so most force professions, the ratio of the job is 90% bored out of your mind, 10% holy shit, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit, right? So I filled the other 90% of my job with flirting with waitresses. That was my deal. So I was doing the other 90% when the guy came up. So I was talking to a new waitress. My focus was there. It was Wednesday. It was dead. I thought I was a badass. People listened. So if somebody comes up, asked to come in, I said, no, you can't come in. Then he said, well, I want to come in. I said, no, you can't come in. Go somewhere else. And then I assumed he was going to do that. Weirdly, he didn't get the memo that I was awesome, and so he decided not to listen. So I'll tell my side of the story first, and then I'll tell the security side. That's the way I usually present it. So what happened was, as I was flirting with this waitress, and at this time, important to the story as well, I've been training forever. So since I was 10, multiple systems. At this time, I was doing FMA. I was doing some submission grappling. Mixed martial arts was becoming kind of a thing, right? So everybody's kind of combining stuff. At this time, it was early 2000, and Canada's about 5 years behind the U.S., so UFC hadn't quite made it here yet. So we're there. All of a sudden, my head moves. And this is what I remember vividly. My head moves, and I was in my head, I was like, what was that? And then my head moved again. I was like, am I getting punched? And again, I've been punched. I know what being punched is like, but in a training context, which I'm glad I'm saying this now and not in a debate. So then the third punch came, and I was like, okay, that's definitely a punch. I'm being punched. So I turned around and I faced the person, and he was whatever. He had a contact point on me, was throwing his fist. All my ninja moves were out the window, and I just went Randy strong, and I just double barred, pushed this guy out the room. He went flying. He slammed into a truck. He got back up. He came at me with an overhand right. I threw my hands up in front of me without any training, so don't sue me, right? I was in trouble. I wrapped the arm, and as the encounter went, my adrenaline started mitigating. My body's like, oh, we've seen this before. Chunking kicked in. So now I'm wrestling, and I've wrestled. So that's fine. We're good. So I'm wrestling, bang, I'm hitting this guy. I throw him out. Oh, he's trying to punch me the whole time. So I hold him. I throw him at a wall, hits the wall. He gets up and he goes for my legs. He starts to try and wrestle me. And this guy's maybe 165, and I was leaner than I am now. I was still probably 205 pounds and training all the time, so I was solid-ish. Yeah. Solid adjacent for sure. So I'm there and I'm talking, and all of a sudden this guy started to wrestle me, and I don't know what's happening. So he grabs my ear, grabs my shirt. I whip him at the ground. He reaches in front of him, and then another doorman comes out to see what's happening, and the guy runs off. So I know, listeners, I said this was my stabbing story. You may have noticed I did not mention there was a knife in play. That's because I did not know there was a knife in play. So I go to the hospital because my ear is torn. My ear is almost off of my head. Like it's on by 2 contact points. And so I'm like, oh my God. So I go to the hospital, whatever, get my ear fixed. Doctor says, he asked why I was limping. I didn't even think I was limping. I'm like, I'm not limping. What are you talking about? We realized I had got stabbed 1 inch into my leg and 3 inches across. There was a slash. So we go to the tape. When I explained the story the first time as my head moved, that was how fast it felt in real life. Like, honestly, I was like, bang, bang. Like, that's what it felt like. That's that time dilation portion of the adrenaline response. When I saw the video, he just rabbit punched me 3 times. So I'm like, oh, I'm doing better than I thought. Like, I thought that took forever, but I'm like, oh, okay, that's pretty quick. So I turned, and again, I just benched him. I did nothing. No technique came out at that time. I was so overwhelmed that I whipped the guy into the truck. When he came with that overhand right, that was actually a knife. He pulled the knife out of his pocket while he was getting up, and he went to overhead stab me in the neck. Luck. Put my hands up, wrapped his arm, controlled the weapon, not knowing there was a weapon there, but I was controlling for punches, right? So had like an overhook, like almost that standard 50-50 grappler's position was kind of what we're playing with, like a dirty version of it. He tries to pepper me all the way down. So while I'm holding him and I'm wrestling, he's trying to murder me, like straight up. And we had much different intent, and that's part of the conversation in the courses that I teach. He gets me in the leg. When he gets me in the leg is when I threw him at the secondary wall. So he stabbed me, but I slashed myself. The slash came. The reason why he started wrestling was he wasn't wrestling. He was going for his knife that was on the ground in front of me. But all of my training looked like he was trying to shoot a double leg on me. So I'm like, why is this guy? So he's fighting for his weapon. I'm wrestling. I'm like, oh, let's fight this. I'll stuff the double, then I'll take him down, and blah, 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 blah. And so the pattern or the chunk that I had was all sport-based at the time, not even understanding there was another variable in it. So he went to grab it. He reached in front of it, grabbed the knife, pulled it. Then the other doorman came, and the person ran off. So the lessons I've learned from this, or the lessons I try to preach and to give to people are, people say this, you may or may not, and I love what you said on our episode, it might have been on the Patreon, where I hate when people say anything definitive. You're going to get cut or you're not going to get cut. That's bullshit. I did, but only because that's what happened. If he would have ran away after he pulled the knife, who knows, right? So you're not always going to get cut. You're not always not going to get cut. Most people say you're not going to see the knife. In my experience of the 3 weapons that entered my body, not that were pulled on me, one was a fork. So it's a joke. I got forked, stabbed right here. I saw that weapon. When I got stabbed in the face, I saw that weapon too. So saying you're not going to see the weapon is also kind of BS, because sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Yeah.
No.
And so that's go ahead. Sorry. No, that's it. So I guess let's talk about the aftermath, because you asked that.
Yeah.
So what happened after this was there is no. So I was competing at the time. There is no reason for you to put in your competitors, like the person you're coaching's mind, the fact that they're going to lose, right? There's no benefit if you're purely competing that you could lose this fight. It's good to hype the person up. It's good to make them feel invincible, etc. So the wave of my ego was I was invincible. And then I hit the cliff of reality where a 165-pound crackhead almost straight up murdered me for $4.50 or $5.50 an hour, whatever I was making at the bar at the time. So the aftermath was I got very depressed, like exceptionally depressed. I stopped training. I thought everything was garbage because I was training FMA. I was doing all this stuff. I did all the things the movie said. And again, MMA was just coming up. Reality-based self-defense was still just a burgeoning industry. There was no totality of this stuff. It was just physical skills. And so for a year I was down. And what brought me out of it was a mutual friend of ours, Rory Miller. I read the book Meditations on Violence. He went through the psychological stuff. So for me, Rory was my port of entry into this world. And it got me out of that funk of, oh, everybody does this. This isn't just me. I wasn't lesser than the people before me. I'm just realizing that the things that happen to me, we don't talk about. So the people that before me, they went through all this shit too. They just didn't mention it. And I'm a very talkative person, so I felt weak. And I'm like, well, why am I talking about it so much? But I'm a verbal processor. So that's kind of the stabbing story.
Oh, great. Thanks for sharing that. And I would add to that, what I tell my students, both, self-defense, Tai Chi Chuan, MMA, I've never fought in my life that I wasn't scared. Ever,
right.
ever.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
It's scary. If you don't think fighting for real, we're not talking about competition, but even competition could be scary. But if you don't think when you're in self-defense situation that it's something to be scared about, that you shouldn't worry, then either you have a very strange definition of reality, or you're a psychopath or something else, that there's something seriously wrong with you, that you can like, oh, this is cool. No, it isn't. Somebody might end you right here and there.
Exactly. So all of my violent encounters I wasn't always the good guy, right? So I've started some shit too. So I think the three mitigators are anger, fear, and pain, right? Like you're gonna be angry or you're gonna be scared, and it's gonna hurt. Yeah. So you gotta have all three of those kind of mitigated when you're doing any kind of fight training.
Yeah, it's one of those things that also, I think your example is a really good way of illustrating the point that I like to make, is that the human body is kind of this weird blend between really tough and very fragile.
Right, exactly.
You get stabbed and you're fine, and then there's this. Fine. I mean, you survived. You didn't even know you were getting slashed. So
no, exactly. Yeah, the recovery sucked, but during it, adrenaline's a hell of a drug.
Exactly. And then there's this famous example. I think I did a violence analysis video of that one a while ago. But I think it was in Russia, obviously, because everything happens there. And I see these guys standing in front of what looks like a store. And one guy walks up to the guy standing there. Some words are exchanged. And the guy who walked up just, punches him, looks like. And the guy who's standing there, the guy's trained and experienced. He just goes into this clinch, does this beautiful leg sweep and so on, just clearly trained. And the guy who attacked him runs off. And like half a minute later, the guy collapses because he'd been stabbed. And he dies. Yes,
I've seen that. Yeah,
and that's the point that I always make, is like, you don't know. It's just like we talked about getting you're gonna bleed in a knife fight. You don't know, and if you might bleed a lot and it's nothing. We know that injuries to the head, they bleed a lot, but they aren't necessarily life-threatening. And on the other hand, you might get stabbed in the body and your liver's nicked and you're pretty much dying right then and there. Unless you get to an emergency room really fast. And there might not necessarily be a lot of blood. You don't know. So it's this weird blend of tough and fragile, and which my point is always like, you don't know which one you're going to get. You might get to scratch, or you might get dead. So why take chances?
Right. We have a video on my YouTube page when me and my partner at KPC Thor were doing breakdown videos, and there's a woman that got stabbed 78 times in the neck and head and survived. But also, right, we could clip your kidney or liver and that's it. You're done, right? So you're right. It is a weird, so much luck. Luck is such a major factor in this, and you can't teach luck, right? That's the problem. I can't teach. Yeah. Luckily I put my hands in the right. He decided to go high instead of low. Luck, right? Yeah. Like I had no idea a knife was even present. So.
I posted that video on my Patreon a while ago where you see that it's open heart surgery. It's a little bit gruesome, but there's a guy who got stabbed in the ribs by a knife. The knife is still in there, and the blade had just slid underneath the artery, just underneath, and you can see and you see the heart beating, and you see how they slowly remove it to not nick that artery. It's like, this is just like a fraction of an inch higher or lower. You're done. So
there's a video going around right now at the time you record this. I don't know when this is coming out. But and I'm sure the listeners will remember it. It's huge, where the lady stabs the child at random. I'm sure you've seen it, Wim. Have you seen this one where the person's walking? I just saw the follow-up on that, and this is the fragile versus not. The kid's eye wasn't affected. I thought he was stabbed right in the eye. And I'm like, oh, this poor kid's life, like this random attack is going to take. But no, only the nose. And I say only, but I mean only in the scale of what could have happened. The nose and the cheek. So luckily, the reaction, the natural human reaction, was to protect the eye, and the child is going to have some crazy scars and some definite trauma, but eye is fine, and that's a huge win. But it could have went literally an inch over or whatever, right? It's not slipping under the artery, right?
Yeah. It's and that brings me back to your podcast episode where we have the discussion and we take a dogmatic side, like I say black, you say white, and vice versa. Is that, dear ladies and gentlemen listening to this podcast, it's nuanced. It's shades of gray. There's
always,
for every single example that you give, and I'll let's piss some people off. For every single example that you give me of somebody using, jiu-jitsu on the ground in a self-defense situation, I will show you a video of somebody getting killed because they tried that.
Yep.
And or getting knocked out in such a bad way that you read. There's this famous one of two guys ending up fighting, a young guy and an older guy, and it looks like they end up doing some ground and pound. So technically, it's not BJJ. Okay, I'll admit that.
Sure.
And the guy getting beat up, his mom shows up and she soccer kicks the guy who's beating up her son in the face, knocks out the guy, and he's out. That's it. That's real life. That's how it happens. Yep. And sure, and I can also show the video of a guy doing a omoplata lock as he's fighting with a guy, and it looks like it's in Brazil, and he just breaks that elbow and you hear it crack.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful technique-wise. It's beautifully done. The guy's experienced. The other guy has no way of punching and biting anything. He's screwed from the get-go. So that's an awesome display of BJJ technique and skill, and it worked in this situation. Yeah. We don't know the context, but it worked. But do you want to end up dead?
I agree. I think it's important to so I think I agree. Shades of gray is the key. It's important to understand the white and black ends of the spectrum and then kind of get the middle too. But I think and this is what drives me crazy on this video again with the stabbing of the child is when people sell a bullshit steak oil. If you would have trained with me, this wouldn't have happened.
That's
cure.
Nonsense.
It's nonsense. All we're selling is percentage points. You're still rolling the dice when you go physical. The more you train, just the higher percentage points of success that may happen. But you're never going to get to 100. Anybody that says they're giving you 100%, get a refund. That's bullshit. There's too many factors and there's too many options. Like you said, BJ works here and it fails here, and then Muay Thai works here and then it fails here. And everybody always that's how humans are, right? We only want to reinforce our own thought process. So everybody's always grabbing the successes. Right?
Yeah.
A BJ, so let's say I'm a BJJ guy. I'm not, but let's say I was. Oh, BJJ is successful. Let's predicate this video of this omoplata where the arm broke. Look, BJJ works, and then of course we can find equal videos. So anybody that's saying there's 100% out there, either is maybe they're just honestly inept. They've never experienced violence, right? So this is the problem with the debate we had. Maybe they've never experienced violence. They don't know how subjective and how random it is. There's been days where I've had 3 people on the ground. I was knocking them out nonstop. And there was one day I slipped on ice and a lady kicked me with high heels, right? It's such a different, every day is so different. It's just, you're selling percentage points. You're not selling a cure. And people need to know that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Switching topics a bit, you work with at-risk youth and victims of abuse. Could you talk a little bit about what you do?
For sure. Groups? So,
go ahead.
Of course, yeah. So a lot of this is my tagline right now for the Randy King Live rebrand is, I love martial arts. I've been doing it for my whole life. So it's going to sound like I'm pooping on it. I'm not. But the reality of a lot of these courses, especially when you work with at-risk people or people who've experienced violence, is that education is accessible now. Technique takes time, right? So we need a certain amount of training time to get you good at a technique, but education is pretty accessible in the immediately after I talk to them, right? So if I teach people we'll say soft skills, hard skills, that's the industry way of saying it. The soft skills stuff to me right now is hyper important. So when I'm teaching these groups, it's really more about, it's important to teach self-defense skills because that builds confidence, and confidence in yourself then builds a healthy self-esteem. But what people don't get, and this is kind of the issue I'm having with the industry, and this is also the purpose of the book that I'm writing, is that a lot of the people out there who have written the books or have done this stuff are people that started way above zero, right? So they were athletically inclined, they were in the military, they had something happen, and their training took care of 90% of the problems they're going to have psychologically, physically. And then they go out and talk to people who've been through situations much different, and the answers they give, they don't even realize, what they think is basic is if it's 0 to them, it's 100 to somebody else. So when I work on these, especially a reserve, for example, so when I say reserve, I mean in Canada, the First Nations, the Indigenous people that were here, they have reserves. They have certain areas they have. There's 2 types in Canada. There's reserves that are assisted by the government, and there's separate nations. The separate nations actually do really fine. The ones that are assisted by the government tend to have culturally a lot of violence. They're a lot more. They're about 50 to 100 years behind human rights at the moment. So when I go to these places, a lot of what I'm doing is just reinforcing that, the way that violence is sold to people is incorrect because it's sold in a sport-based mentality, in a weight class mentality, in a you get to leave mentality. And that's just primarily not the case. And especially when I'm working with the people that are victimized, is a lot of these people did fight back, right? They tried and they failed, and they realized that violence is not a tool for them to use in the situation they're in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So when I go to these reserves, I work with a company called Paradigm Self-Esteem. And the self-esteem company is amazing because she helps build them up. But the reserve work, I think, is the most important thing I do because it redefined my version of self-defense. There's so many people I ran into, and I don't try to judge, right? If you survived, you can't survive wrong. So if you survived, you survived. So whatever you did to do it, I'm not going to try and armchair quarterback what you should have done better. It reminds me like the old Ronda Rousey days where she was armbarring people in 16 seconds, and then some BJJ guys like, if she used this armbar, it would have happened in 13 seconds. Like, who cares, right? Like, why are you armchair quarterbacking success? It doesn't make a lot of sense. I digress. So in this situation, a lot of these people, like, they don't even feel like they are worth defending.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, they're so beaten down. They're so in such a bad spot. So the only reason I enjoy doing the work is that I come on day 3 of a self-esteem, self-confidence building course. Yeah. So they have 3 days of training of you're worth it. This is how this works. This is what we do. And then I get them. And so what I'm teaching there is I'm teaching physical skills. I'm teaching very, like, primary targets, like the classic, like throat, eyes, like grapple, escape, like basic stuff, like the really, really simple stuff. I think that people, especially in this industry, complexity bias kicks in very hard, and they think that things are more complicated than they need to be. And I'm really trying to inform people that try simple first and then proceed forward, right? So everybody's like, oh, you can't eye gouge me if I'm doing BJJ to you. I'm correct, you can't. Most of the time, if you're in a good position, I can't. But if I can, let's try simple first, and then we'll do the complicated response second, right? So I'm trying to sell this simple thing and kind of give them – word empowerment so loaded, but I'm trying to empower them to believe they can do damage. So we gear up and we teach them they can hurt people, etc. So the way we spend the time is 30% education. We go over classification of violence. We let them share their stories. We let them talk, which then, of course, increases my worldview because the things that happen there are not things that I would be privy to. I'm not on the same victim threat profile list as some of the young women on these reserves. And some of the stories I heard are horrific, and they've really changed my view on violence. And then we go into physical skills, but most is teach them like how to report, who to go to, give them a safety net, give them an escape route and a way out. And I don't just mean out of the room or the encounter. I mean out of their life in general.
Yeah, that's really great. I think I've worked throughout years many times with women who've been raped and abused and beaten up. It's one of the hardest things to do for me as a teacher, but it's also one of the most rewarding because you sometimes, if you're lucky, you see some of these people again after a while, and then you see the change. It doesn't always happen, but sometimes you see like this wasn't for nothing. This what I taught that person actually helped them either get out of that situation or deal with the aftermath of the abuse better and so on. And actually, this tomorrow, I'm actually teaching a self-defense seminar to teenage girls, late teens, early 20s, because there was this high-profile rape and murder in Belgium about half a year ago, and everybody freaks out again. And I was contacted to put something together. So,
right,
and it was a horrific murder. It was pretty bad. So. There's a lot of misinformation out there. Like you said, a lot of people sell solutions that aren't really solutions at all. And I think the key point is, as you mentioned, that there's just so much more going on than just the physical part. And if only in the industry there would be more attention to that would be great.
I think that's what at least that's my mission right now. And like it's, I had a point here. I forgot what it was. It's really, so like actually one of my bugaboos, one of my bugbears is people selling self-defense courses and marketing it to victims of domestic abuse when they don't realize that, like, if you live with the person and you intend to stay, you going physical just escalates it. It doesn't stop it, right? It's not like it's not stranger danger, right? And we can go over the numbers. 70% of people in North America, 70% of women are victimized by people they know or have some kind of existing relationship with, whether they know about the relationship or not, i.e. a stalking situation. But they don't understand that, like, there's the whole context of the situation is more important than just the physical. While the physical is important, because there is times where all the education isn't going to matter. If somebody's got a knife at your neck and is punching you in the face against the wall, like, it's not time for soft skills here. This is time to do something physical.
Yeah.
But first off, they need to know they're worth defending. They need to understand that they can defend somebody. And a lot of the people, when they do this, is humans are based off of patterns, right? It's almost like the elephant and the string, right? You put a chain on it, what's a baby? You realize it can't work, then a string seems like a chain. Humans have the same kind of effect. So if you are a smaller human being, not necessarily female, but just smaller, if you are a smaller person and you've spent your life, all of your violence has been wrestling and horseplay and weight-based games, you're going to think you can't win, right? Because of the rules. Also, I like to pick on it, and I'm not speaking for women, but for myself, the male ego is exceptionally fragile. If you are a toxic person and your girlfriend beats you up, you're going to pout about it, right? And so not only did the smaller people learn that winning is impossible, they also learn that even if they do win, they'll be punished for it.
Yeah.
So they get into this system of just garbage where they don't know what they're allowed to do or not allowed to do, and they've tried to do something, but they weren't taught. And then once you can show them, like, violence is a tool, and it's easy to use, and if you take away your concern for the other person, hurting people isn't that tough, right? It's like I don't mean emotionally. I mean, like, me putting a finger through your eyeball is not a hard thing. Like, everybody can point. Babies can do it. My brother-in-law got both eye gouged by his son and his nose broken by his son. So he right, and this is a baby, giant baby headbutt and a poke, right? Like, we're me versus my coffee table. Coffee table is the undefeated champ of my building, right? Like, I keep slamming into it. I've never beat it once. But they need to know this. And so when I work with them, it's not only just the physical skill, because I also work with a group called UCAN, which is Youth Canada, and they give them jobs. So not only and them taking the course, does it give them hopefully a stable role model that they can see there's a guy out here who's not trying to victimize them, who doesn't want to use them sexually, who doesn't want to take resources from them. Also, I'm giving them an infrastructure of, like, with the youth, I tell all the youth, if they've taken the course and they do well in the course, they can use me as a reference on a job application. Yeah. Right? So not only are we're fixing the thing, we're also fixing their life intrinsically, because the studies show if we can get them out of a low socioeconomic level, that's actually better self-defense than all the Krav Maga training in the world. Yeah. Right? So the existing structure is very, very important as well.
Cool. And I think that you touched on some really good points here. And basically what I think it boils down to is that self-defense is very different from one person to the other, from one social context to the other, and then the individual situation. Even then, like you mentioned, that if you live with a person, fighting is not necessarily the ultimate answer, quite on the contrary. So I'm looking at time a little bit, to making sure that we stay on track. But I would recommend everybody to go to randykingalive.com and check out Randy's courses. There's a bunch of them. Self-defense, educational courses only, dirty boxing, dynamic frame knife defense, weapon systems, high school and security-based programs. So there's a whole lot of stuff right there that people can get in touch with you to learn. Awesome. I am going to move on to the questions from my patrons. Now, before I say that, I said it in the introduction, but also we're doing a bonus episode after this episode here on my Patreon, where I take more questions from my patrons, because I've got a few, but I want to take two here, and then afterwards Randy and I continue talking on that bonus episode on Patreon, patreon.com/Wim Demeere, my name. There we go. Wiebe asked, Randy, in teaching avoidance, how to exercise, drill, and practice that? Avoidance.
Sure, yeah. So Vibert, hey buddy, love that guy. Met him a couple times, so I want to give him a shout out. Great human being, always comments.
True.
The answer is train it, right? So I know that's in the question, but this is the problem, is that people aren't training this avoidance thing. So if you are looking to train boundary setting and avoidance, you have to make sure there's a parameter in the drill where that counts as a success. So I hate when the term winning is used when it comes to self-defense, because winning is such a dominance-based thought process. I like to use the term success. And there's different ways to succeed. You can succeed by leaving. You can succeed by restraining. You can succeed by disabling the person. You can succeed by enduring until another option pops up. So knowing what your goal is important. So when you're bringing it back to training, allowing yourself to have that as an option. And this is exceptionally hard if you're in the magic demographic of 14 to 24. Learning how to be like, oh, a win is leaving takes a lot of time, right? It's a very important thing. I learned this in my career as a bouncer. For the first 3 years, I fought everybody, and it sucked. And then I was like, screw this, I'm going to be friendly. And that was way easier. Yeah. So, like, having that. But if you're going to train it, like, go through the process of, like, creating a boundary, go through verbal skills, have a scaling ability with the person, and don't always end the drill on a physical altercation. Let the person read the situation. And eat, especially if the person outsmarted you. So if you are practicing these avoidance drills, person comes up to you, you're using a verbal barrier and a physical barrier, and the attacker during the drill decides they want to attack you. If you can talk a person out of that in training, that's great reps in doing it in real life. So the best way to practice is to practice it, but also don't penalize it, right? So don't let people build scenarios that only have one success. Make sure the success is dominant by the way it's played.
All right, pretty good. And then we get to his second question, and that is how to set a good example as a trainer. So as a trainer, how do you set a good example?
Yeah, well, that's such a big question. He's good at big questions. I think and the word authentic is also loaded, but authentically just be yourself. I think the best way to set a good example is just to be you and don't pretend to be anybody else, right? So when you're in there, just know what you're good at, know what you're not good at, know your benefits, know your negatives, be aware of it. And as a good trainer, I think active listening is such an important skill that a lot of trainers don't have. So many trainers are just trying to get through their talking points as fast as possible that they're not actually listening to the conversation. I was part of a group seminar, and there was multiple instructors that were there, and one of the instructors who's a very good presenter. Somebody asked a question, and he answered the question that normally pops up in that part of the conversation, not the question that was asked, right? And so I think if you want to be a good example, like show the people, and this is primarily self-defense. I don't think this goes over to martial arts. Martial arts, be a good example is do the work, right? Do the work. Don't be like sitting on the couch while your students work out, like lead by example, etc. Right?
I think it would also apply. I think it crosses over.
For sure. But so I think for this, like, how do you set a good example is just be you. Don't be dishonest. Don't be disingenuous. Admit where your knowledge ends and just be the person you say you're going to be. So example, I don't get into Facebook arguments anymore because I teach a class called conflict communication. If I teach a class called conflict communication and I'm arguing on the internet every day, maybe don't learn that from me, right? So so I had to really pull back. So when people start to get angry, I love, if you know anything about me, I love haters. Haters, please hate me. I feed off. It's so funny to me. But I think that just do the thing you're going to do, right? If you're teaching self-defense as avoidance, don't pick fights on the internet.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense to me. I would agree with you when you say that, be yourself, be genuine. I would add on to that is that, what's the image that you have of a teacher? What would be an awesome teacher? And try to be that guy. I remember when I was in my early teens and started learning, I started with judo and jiu-jitsu, and the teacher was like, oh my God, guy is God. He's awesome. Right. And then I found out that he was a pretty flawed person. I was like, oh, wow, that sucks. And pretty much every teacher I've had turned out to be a regular person, and all very different characters, very different personalities, but all just regular folks. And this myth of putting the teacher on a pedestal, I hate that. But also, as a teacher, don't put yourself there.
Agreed. Don't believe your own hype. That's rule number one. Do not believe your hype. The second you're like, I am the world's most, you're done. You're done. Yeah. Don't believe that crap. Yeah.
And I try to tell that to my students, like, I'm just doing what I think is right. And I'm just giving you guys my take on things. It doesn't mean I know everything. It doesn't mean I'm right. You can say that I'm wrong about this. It's fine. I can totally accept that. However, I will ask you to, kind of justify your response and expand on that a little bit with arguments, as opposed to no, this sucks. Okay, maybe this sucks for you, but can you tell me why? Then we get somewhere productive.
Define sucks.
Yeah, Bill Clinton might have a, what do you mean?
Very subjective. English is very subjective.
All right. Well, I hope that's a good answer for Wiebe. Just to round things off before we go to the Patreon bonus episode, what are you working on right now?
So currently I'm working on two major things. Number one is I'm working on my online course for the pre-attack Q seminar that I teach. So we're going to be doing an online video course, ideally filled with games and potentially an app. I'm working on doing maybe an app so we could do like on your phone, learn how to do situation awareness, get points.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's possible. This is my mad scheme. We'll see what happens. And also I'm working on my second book, but my first book delving into the self-defense industry. So I already have a book out called Selling Out to Your Level of Comfort. It's how to market and build your business, and people are finding a lot of success with it, actually, which is funny because it's a book I didn't want to write. I just wrote it because a man named Rory Miller forced me to. And so I got it out there. But the next book coming out is going to be called Starting at Zero, A Guide to Self-Defense for Everybody Else. And we will be talking about the topics I was kind of discussing here, right? Like, hey, maybe you're starting at, like, a lot of instructors pat themselves on the back for the work they've done with their students. And that's awesome. You should. Good for you. I'm glad you're doing work with your students. But understand that the second somebody emails you or walks into your dojo, they've already had 100 successes you weren't even a part of. So while I love that people take credit, don't take all the credit for your students' jump, because just the fact that they emailed you or the fact they walked into your gym shows huge jumps on their own, let alone the stuff you can add. We are part of the journey. I don't like people claiming they're the whole journey. So those are the two major things. As Wim said, I have a Patreon if you want to jump on there. Lots of final thoughts for my other podcast, the debate one, and a ton of just soft skill stuff, hard skill stuff. I'm putting on our version of the FMA system on there soon. We're filming this weekend. So.
All right. And what's your website address? Where can people reach you there?
RandyKingLive.com is on everything. So if you type in RandyKingLive.com into the search engine, that'll be my YouTube, my Patreon, my Facebook, my Instagram. I don't use Twitter. I can't stand it. I don't even have an account. So, and I freak out about it in my book a lot. But if you want to get a hold of me, I am hyper accessible. I cannot stress enough. If you liked what you heard and you want to ask more questions, reach out. Facebook's my preferred reach out method, even over text. I just like the layout of it. Get a hold of me. I'm bored at airports a lot. So feel free to reach out. I will always say hi and answer any questions you have.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, we are going to end this part of the podcast and then just gently slide into the bonus podcast for my patrons.
Sounds great.
For everybody listening here, I want to thank you for listening. Randy, I want to thank you for sharing everything with the listeners.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, that was my pleasure. We'll do it again maybe in a little while and maybe talk some more about anything that comes up. And maybe I'll drink some beer in the meantime. You drink some whiskey and it'll be even better.
Oh, I'm in. I'll definitely do a drunk version of this. It's a plan.
All right. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks for listening to the Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.